Yes. Oh, other Sam 1 or Sam 2?
Yeah.
Is devoted to the question of what is next for Palestinian leadership. If you meant to be somewhere else, this is the time to leave. If you didn't, this is the time to turn off any of your electronic devices, cell phones, beepers, or whatever, so that we're not interrupted in the course of the program. My name is Elaine Rubin. I'm a member of the J Street President's Council and otherwise involved. And my job is to launch us and then pull us together at the very end. Toward the end of the session, there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. And where are the microphones? Okay. And you'll have an opportunity, everybody's pointing, and you'll have an opportunity to line up then. In the meanwhile, I would like to introduce our moderator, whom we are very pleased to work with today. Muna Shikaki is an on-air correspondent and video journalist for Al Arabiya News Channel, and she has reported from more places in the world than most of us can even list. Her MS in journalism is from Columbia University. Her BA was from Birzeit in Ramallah, and she was a 2004 Fulbright Scholar. She has visions to share with us, as well as to help us understand the visions of others. So I'm happy to turn the platform over to her.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. So our topic today is going to be the Palestinian leadership, where it is right now, and where we're going forward. I want to first introduce my panelists over here. To my right is Huda Abu Arqoub. She's the first on-the-ground regional director for the Alliance for Middle East Peace. She was also, before that, a consultant to several American and Palestinian NGOs. And she also, before that, worked at the Ministry of Education in Palestine. She lives in Hebron. And to her, can you guys hear me now? All right, great. And to her right is Khalid El-Gindi. Khalid is a fellow at the Brookings Center for Middle East Policy. Before that, he worked as a consultant to the Palestinian negotiators, and he was involved in the Annapolis peace talks as well. He lives here in Washington, D.C. And to his right is Sam Mahmoud, who is a Palestinian-American businessman and entrepreneur. He moved to the West Bank from Ohio in the 90s. He lives there now, and he's one of the people who founded the Palestinian telecommunications company, Paltel. He's a policy advisor to Al-Shabaka, and he's also the chairman and co-founder of Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. So first we're going to start with Khalid El-Gindi, who's going to speak for about 4 minutes. He's going to tell us a little bit more about how an ineffective and dysfunctional peace process has weakened the Palestinian leaders and vice versa. So go ahead, Khalid.
Thank you, Mona, and thank you to my fellow panelists, and thank you to J Street for hosting us. Okay, is that better? It's not better? Okay, is this better? All right, I can even hear it. Thank you all, and thank you especially to our hosts, J Street, for inviting us and for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here at J Street again. I've done a number of J Street events, and I'm thrilled to be here. As Mona said, I want to outline what I think are the sort of inherent links between the failure of the peace process and the ineffectiveness and dysfunction of the Palestinian leadership. I would argue that the peace process has contributed to the weakening of Palestinian legitimacy and the weakness of the Palestinian leadership. This is primarily because the legitimacy of the Palestinian leadership has always been intimately bound up in the success and failure of the peace process. And actually, I would argue vice versa. The weakness of the Palestinian leadership has also contributed to the failure and ineffectiveness of the peace process. In other words, I think it's impossible to have a viable peace process when you have an ineffective and a number of question marks over the legitimacy over the Palestinian leadership. I think of the peace process as part of a three-headed regime that Palestinians live under. I mean, we're used to thinking of the Middle East, Middle Eastern Arab peoples living under these authoritarian regimes. And they're usually one regime, the Mubarak regime, the Sisi regime, the Assad regime. But in the case of the Palestinians, really you have this kind of three-headed regime, which consists of the peace process on the one hand, the Israeli occupation, and the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian leadership. And all three are sort of interconnected and interwoven with one another to the extent that it's often hard to disentangle them and to tell which is which. And I think that's very much true for Palestinians. When they rebel against one, they inevitably end up rebelling against the other. That's because of this inherent link, organic link between all of them. I would also say that the future of the current leadership is very much tied not just to the peace process, but to a two-state solution. Fatah itself has been advocating a two-state solution of one kind or another for not just the last 20 years, but actually the last 40 years. It's only recently, actually, that the rest of the international community has come on board. Let me just sort of round out the discussion. I'm not how much time?
You have time.
Okay. Let me just round out the discussion by saying, sort of putting this into context. And that context is that this Palestinian leadership and legitimacy crisis is happening in the context of the broader leadership and legitimacy crisis that we see playing out in the rest of the Arab world. This PLO leadership is very much part of the same generation of leaders in the rest of the Arab world. Although it is not a state, it was part of the same state-building exercise that began in the 1950s and 60s that led to the creation of the PLO, the very same process that led to these failed or failing states around the Arab world. So just to sort of situate it in that context. And really all Palestinian leadership institution and leadership, political institutions and leadership institutions are in a state of crisis and disrepair, from the PLO and the PA on the one hand to including also the Hamas Authority in Gaza. The Fatah-Hamas division, I think, has been highly damaging. It is one of the lowest points in the history of the Palestinian national movement. There are no functioning institutions or very few functioning governing and political institutions. The PLO has been hollowed out from within to create the PA, and the PA itself is in a state of decay. We don't have oversight institutions like a parliament either in the PA or in the PLO. So when we hear of institution building programs, I think we have to really take those with a grain of salt, since the most essential institutions are either in a state of decay or simply don't exist. We've seen also the PA lacks the capacity to deliver on the ground, not only in Gaza, but increasingly in the West Bank as well. There is a crisis of representation, something that has plagued the Palestinian people for many decades. Initially, the PLO was known as the sole legitimate representative of all Palestinians, including at one point even Palestinian citizens of Israel. But at a minimum, and once upon a time primarily the Palestinians in the diaspora. And today that's no longer the case. Not only is it hard to argue that the PLO is representative of Palestinians in the diaspora, but it is increasingly difficult even to argue for their representation of Palestinians in Gaza and also in East Jerusalem, where they have no jurisdiction. I think one point, Abbas's, and I'll end on this point, Abbas's reluctance to go back to Gaza and assist with the reconstruction process, I think, is symptomatic of this failed leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khalid. And now Sam is going to go ahead and tell us more. He's going to describe where the Palestinian leadership is now, whether it's the PA or other forms of leadership. He's also going to tell us where it should be going.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Can everyone hear? What I've been asked to do is to give a descriptive of where the Palestinian leadership is. And I'd like to run down first the posture of the Palestinian leadership. It's a fragmented leadership by design of the occupation. That doesn't mean we have not made mistakes, or our leadership has not made mistakes. They've made many. But ultimately, the underlying theme around the governance structure of the Palestinian people has been how the Israeli occupation has affected its fragmentation. Let me give you a few examples. First, we have our national leadership. The national leadership is, as Khalid said, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. That's the one you should be worried about, because that's the one that, although it may be defunct at the moment, or at least not functioning in a way that can actually produce policy that we can actually interact with, it is the one that officially still represents all Palestinians, no matter where they reside. And that's an important theme, because as I learned, I'm a business person, not a political scientist, but as I learned, in politics there are no vacuums. Until that structure gets replaced, that's the structure we have to deal with, no matter how weak or inefficient it is. And then we have the leadership under the occupied territory leadership, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza leadership. That's the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, which has been mandated by the PLO to be a, post-Oslo, an administrator to those Palestinians like myself who live under occupation. That Palestinian occupied territory leadership had with it a structure, a legislative structure called the Palestine Legislative Council. Since the elections in 2006, that structure has no longer been meeting, partly because of the split between Hamas and Fatah, and partly because the Israelis have very accurately arrested 15 legislative council members, which no longer allow the parliament to have quorum to actually meet. So again, the occupation plays a very serious factor in how we're able to govern ourselves. At the local level, the Palestinian leadership, in this vacuum of a national effective leadership, is seen through municipal councils. These municipal councils, cities and villages, have had elections recently, most recently, and except for Gaza, which did not allow elections to happen, where elections on the municipal level can happen, they have, and that also is a pocket of leadership that we should look at. We also have the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which are running the refugee camps, whether in Palestine or out of Palestine. The camp residents also have popular camp committees that interact with UNRWA to be able to manage their affairs within the camp. That's another pocket of Palestinian leadership. We have civil society leadership. I've actually written an article a couple years ago saying the civil society leadership is in the lead. It's the one that's creating movement on the ground, and many times we find the municipal or national leadership trying to follow up. And there we have formal NGOs, many of them related or funded by international NGOs. We have community efforts which are happening, and then part of that civil society leadership would be, for example, the BDS movement, which is one piece of the puzzle and not the entire piece of the puzzle of civil society. Then we have another fragmented part of our leadership which resides in prisons. And that may seem odd, but every single prison has a leadership body which interacts with the prison. And all of those leadership bodies in the prison then form a prisoners' movement, which is a voice within the Palestinian leadership structure. Another structure that comes from the effect of the occupation, creating a critical mass of prisoners. And then lastly, I can note that we have Palestinian Israeli citizens, as we saw in the recent elections, who ran in a unified list, also challenging not only their presence in Israel, not only the right to vote, but the right to be able to have a non-discriminative living environment, but also they are challenged with how they fit into the larger Palestinian structure. Having gone through several of the fragmented parts of our leadership, that was the bad news. The good news is you don't have to worry about any of that, because that's our problem. That is an internal Palestinian challenge, and it's a huge one that we have to deal with. And that's a responsibility that we must take. From an external viewpoint, from your viewpoint, or from the US's viewpoint, or from the Israeli government's viewpoint, there is a very clear and recognized leadership of the PLO, which actually was reinforced in the resolution that the Palestinian leadership got passed by 138 countries in November of 2012. It was the statehood bid, and if you read this very interesting and dynamic kind of document, in it, it identifies for the state of Palestine the government to be the PLO. And that's an important link to this current structure. And it gives it kind of a new breath and a new reason why it needs to formulate yet again in a more effective way, because now it's linked to the state bid itself.
Thank you so much, Sam. And now I'm going to move along to Huda, who's going to tell us more about why the Palestinian Authority has failed and what they can do looking forward. Here you go.
Okay. Sabah al khair. Good morning, everybody. I hope you are still like me. I have been on too many panels, so I'm sorry. And I hope that I'm going to bring something new to you to think of. And as some of you know me, I come with questions rather than answers. And today, I'm going to speak from the people's point of view, the people who are on the ground in Israel and Palestine, and hopefully the Palestinians who are also in the diaspora, which I don't claim that I can speak on their behalf. But I think that what we have been witnessing for the past few decades when the peace process started is that we as people have compromised on so many things in order to support our leadership to come and start working on building a viable Palestinian state. The story is that the more we monitor how the leadership has been compromised by the international community and by the peace process itself, the more we felt that this leadership is failing rather than succeeding. And the more that we felt frustrated, and in some ways we went back to our own roots in order to try and find other leadership alternatives within the community itself. Now, is this democratic? I don't know. Do I think that the elections process that took place in Palestine, and the last one was in 2006, is democratic? No. Do I boycott it? Sometimes, yes. I think it should be boycotted because it's not representative of all the Palestinian people who are living in the whole world. I do believe that it actually compromises the rights of the majority of the Palestinians if we go for elections that only representative of the people who are living in Gaza and the West Bank. So there is no voice for the Palestinians who live inside Israel. There is no a voice for the Palestinians who live in refugee camps, or a huge number of Palestinians living in refugee camps, and we claim that we can speak on their behalf. And the Palestinians who live in the diaspora, which the BDS movement is actually part of, partially representative of them. So when we as Palestinians growing up in Palestine, I was born in Jerusalem, raised in Hebron, seeing how Palestine is shrinking, not in terms of the land itself, but it's also in its leadership. I have no perspective for the future. I cannot predict the future. All I'm seeing now is that the best option on the table is for the Palestinian Authority to leave. And this is the sentiment in the streets in Palestine. Why do we want the Palestinian Authority to leave? And I'm not saying something, not out there. Mahmoud Abbas has already said that this is one of the options that is on the table. We don't think they are going anywhere. The American broker in this equation is not being honest or partial. The international community is getting more even radical when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or not even caring. There are so many problems around in the world. But when you look at the larger context, I think that the Palestinians are the most stable community in the region so far. We did not go against the Palestinian leadership in a violent way. We actually are having the conversation on the ground that there is a need for a change in leadership. One of the main failures of the Palestinian Authority since it came to Palestine is that it did not give a space for local leadership to grow. And the Israeli occupation contributed to the fact that we have many of our leaders in prison. Many people ask me all the time, where is the Palestinian Gandhi? Well, they are in prison. So there are so many forces working against any kind of formation of a new leadership. But the conversation is still going on how we can rethink the peace process? How can we rethink the Palestinian structure in terms of leadership? And how can we, as Palestinians all over the world, support a more functional leadership? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huda, and our panel. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions to the panel before we open it up for the audience questions. So, Khalid, I'd like it if you could tell us a little bit more about what the Palestinian leadership can do going forward when it comes to, international agencies, going to international agencies versus being under the U.S. negotiations umbrella. And then after that, Huda, if you could explain a little, you said here that that the Palestinian Authority should leave. If it does, who would replace it? Who would fill the void? Would this void be filled when it comes to, external issues, when it comes to, foreign functions, or just when it comes to internal functions? تفضل Khalid.
If I were advising the Palestinian leadership today, and I'm not, but if I were, I would say, before entering into another round of impossible negotiations, and I fundamentally believe that failure is built into the DNA of this quote-unquote peace process. But in any case, if I were advising them, I would say, you need to fix your own house first. Before you can go in and talk to the Israelis or even talk to the Americans, or for that matter, going to the international community or through international forums, you need to reestablish the collapsed consensus and consensuses, actually, on the Palestinian side. And that is, there is not just a collapsed consensus on who should lead, but also what is the nature of the national project? Is it still two states? Is it one state? Is it something else? And who do we represent? And who, before we can get to the discussion of who represents us. But even more fundamental than that, there are basic things that the Palestinian leadership is not doing, like in Gaza. And I think it is reckless and irresponsible for both Hamas and Fatah to play politics, to play petty parochial politics in such a cynical way when so much is at stake in Gaza and so many lives have been shattered and people continue to live in tents and in makeshift homes. Tens of thousands of people are without homes. Gaza is without electricity for large portions of time. You still have the blockade is in place, and essentially both sides are playing politics with the lives of hundreds and thousands, if not more, of Palestinians. And I think that needs to end. There needs to be much more accountability, and there needs to be much more action, quite frankly, on the ground.
So, in the case of the Palestinian Authority closing and leaving, we have different scenarios on the ground. One is actually being played already. And those who pay close attention to the internal Palestinian affairs would notice how Hamas is actually now engaging in like alternative Fatah leadership, which is Dahlan coming back to Gaza and having another PLO person who is going to replace the Palestinian Authority to partner with and create some sort of a leadership in Gaza. So that's one scenario that maybe in the future, as we Palestinians look at things, we think that this is going to be the future state of Palestine, Gaza. And it will be an Islamic Palestinian state. And they will have a port and they will have, that's what Hamas is asking for, and an airport, and that's it. And that will actually reinforce Netanyahu's quest for a Jewish state recognition. The second scenario is actually a total vacuum and chaos, that the occupation is actually going to claim its role back to the West Bank. And so they will have to rule and we will go back to square one before Oslo and before Gaza and Jericho first plan, where the occupation has its own committees in Gaza and in the West Bank, and they will have to pay checks and take care of the garbage in Gaza. And, you know, this is according to Geneva, this is their responsibility. And the third is actually what we are hoping to achieve is first to release the leadership that is in prison, and one of them, and the person that most of the Palestinian youth agree on has the capacity to lead is Marwan Barghouti, who is in prison, and I'm not advocating for him. I'm just putting here some certain scenarios. This person can unite us in a way that can bring a hope for some sort of a functional leadership on the ground. Now, what this leadership can do is actually up to how the context is going to look like when he is released and is able to form a new leadership. And the worst is total chaos, especially because we have around us ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then we will see that these groups are going to come in and fill the vacuum. And frankly speaking, we don't have a strategy to go against them. Our educational system, social system, everything is collapsing, so we have no defense mechanism against the occupation coming back or other radical organizations coming in to fill the blankets.
Thank you, Huda. Very interesting. Sam, I want you to talk a little bit about the Arab Spring in Palestine. I know that a lot of the protests that were happening there were not covered because of all of the other stuff that was happening around the Middle East that seemed to be a lot more interesting and serious. Were the Palestinian youth who were demonstrating against the Palestinian Authority, were they concerned about issues relating to the PA's foreign policy, so to speak, or was it more focused on the internal dynamics? And also tell us more about what people outside of Palestinians outside of Palestine are interested in having. Are they interested in the one state? Are they interested in the resumption of negotiations? Are they interested in going to third parties, to international agencies?
Well, I think one thing we need to note is, many people ask, where's the Palestinian Arab Spring? And they forget that we've been in one for the last 25 years. So ours happened long before Tahrir Square, and we're a little bit fatigued even in terms of continuing to revolt. And our revolt is a little bit different than the Arab Spring one. The Arab Spring, as it's called, was addressing central governments of its own people. Ours had to deal with, first and foremost, an external party, the occupation, the Israeli military, the Israeli government, and that was a central point of any kind of activity before people saw governance within the Palestinian Authority or the PLO as being the focal point. As time has moved on, those youth, and not only youth, even the established civil society players have become more interested in addressing our internal governance issue, especially after the Gaza West Bank split. Because that split is not only a political split, that has taken dimensions which cannot be resolved even if tomorrow morning they would sign an agreement and come back together in a serious way. There have been two legal systems developed. There has been two judicial systems developed. There have been facts made on the ground. There have been investments made based on different kinds of scenarios which cannot, by a push of a button, come back together. The more people saw that split was taking institutional frameworks, the more people started to focus on our internal reality. Where people want to see things go, that's an interesting question. I actually just recently, 10 days ago, wrote in Arabic and English, because I write in English, but this one in specific I wanted to write in Arabic and put in the Arabic press, addressing how we need to reset the Palestinian political system. And this is a serious debate that happened, and it's ongoing, and I actually am proposing some very serious questions to the Palestinian leadership, and not only the Palestinian leadership that we see on TV, but all of the factions that make up the PLO. Some of them that are almost non-existent today, but we speak about them as if they still exist. And the three questions that I pose to them are the following. One, do we all still agree that international law and the UN resolutions are the framework to guide us? And that's a very important question, because with the loss of hope and the greater despair that's happening, there are pockets within our community which are saying, especially to us secular Palestinians, you all must be pretty stupid. Are you still thinking that the United Nations and working within the parameters of the Fourth Geneva Convention are going to resolve this after 48 years? And that's a hard debate. My answer to that is yes. Not that I'm so excited that the UN has an automatic solution, but I know that there is no other alternative that can get us to an end game. The second question I ask is, are we in 2015 still recognizing the State of Israel? Not in my opinion, the undefinable State of Israel as proclaimed by Netanyahu and his government, but the State of Israel which sits next to us in the UN, the one that the rest of the international community recognized. We did recognize them in writing, and that's why the Oslo process started. I want to recheck on that in 2015, and now, especially with this latest Israeli elections results, I'm wondering if recognition of the State of Israel is being considered to be withdrawn, given the announcement that the Israeli government has no intention for two states. And the last question, which you and my leadership finds rather shocking probably, is, do we recognize the State of Palestine? Not the one in our hearts and in the poetry that we write, but the one that sits in the UN, and the one that sits there because we brought a resolution in 2012 with our own hands to get a seat there as a state. And I want to hear that reconfirmation from the Palestinian leadership, not the top leadership, but all the elements below, that they are fully aligned with that state. I actually wish they would have called it the new state of Palestine to make the difference between the historic state of Palestine.
Thank you so much, Sam. I have a couple other questions for the panel, but before that, I want to open it up for questions. We have a mic over here, so if people can line up with their questions. We're going to take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then the panel will answer them, and we'll take another batch of questions. Please make sure that you're actually asking a question and not reading a statement. And if you could make them brief, that would be awesome. Go ahead, sir.
Assuming Israel will speak to the Palestinians, with whom should they speak?
Is the question directed towards a specific member of the panel?
Well, Sam.
Okay.
Because he laid out all the different factions.
Okay. Next question.
Hi. I guess perhaps I'd pose this question to Sam Bahur. Is that the correct pronunciation? Thank you. I'm just concerned about the opportunities for communications between the Palestinians themselves, divided into these 2 distinct geographical entities, Gaza and the West Bank. How do they communicate with each other? And I'm not talking about just in terms of leadership, but the average person. What opportunities do they have to share perspectives, to share ideas, and then, given what we hear about the absence of electricity and the reliance of electricity on telecommunications, even for people living within those distinct territories, what is the impact on the interruptions in communication? What opportunities are there for communication? And how might this be addressed to facilitate enhanced communication in the future?
Thank you. Next question.
I'm Paul Shem. I teach Israel Studies at the University of Maryland. Hi, Sam. We've known each other for decades. I wanted to ask, given the current disruption in Israeli-American relations, are Palestinians taking this opportunity to deal or talk to and persuade the American government that Palestinian governance is essential? especially not to veto Hamas PA cooperation, which I've been writing for years, is a prerequisite for any progress, that it's in Israeli interest. So do you think the U.S. government will now be more receptive to this? And can you see a scenario in which this can help bring Hamas and the PLO in some sort of reconciliation?
Thank you. One more question before we go back to our panel to answer.
Hi, my name's Annalise. I'm from University of Wisconsin. So the residents of Gaza and West Bank have largely diverged from each other economically, politically, and culturally. And I'm wondering what the plans are to connect the two territories into a unified Palestine, and if a three-state solution is a viable option.
Thank you very much. So let me sum up the questions really quickly. For Sam, the question is, who should Israel negotiate with, and the communications between the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank? And actually, I'd like to hear from Khalid more about the Fatah Hamas split, because you think that actually this split makes it more difficult for the PLO to reach a deal with Israel and not easier. And then let's talk about the Palestinian, what can be done to fix the Palestinian split between Gaza, the West Bank, and the three-state solution. Huda, I'll have you address that. So Sam, go ahead.
The first question is rather simple for me, of who they should speak to. I was trying to allude to that in my opening remarks. The Israeli side, or any other party for that matter, should speak to the party that they signed the agreement of Oslo with, the one they recognized in writing, the PLO. What's behind the PLO is our problem. But in terms of who is the other party that you're speaking to, it's the clear internationally legitimate representative of the Palestinians, which is the Palestine Liberation Organization, represented by Mahmoud Abbas. And I say that, and I'm getting a lot of pokes in my stomach because I know there's a lot of work for us to do to make that entity better. But that's not your problem. Bibi is a rather interesting character because he's a PR expert. He can create crisis out of nothing. And if he wants to look into our society to find the pockets that are the most radical, then at least let's be fair and let us look into the Israeli society and then decide if we want to deal with Israel while Abraham Lieberman is in the minister, or Naftali Bennett is a minister, or the presence of the Hilltop Youth is accepted. I mean, we can find pockets in the Israeli community to make us not want to speak to the Israelis. We're beyond that. We've recognized the state of Israel, and we are dealing with them no matter what they dish out to us, including a third term of Netanyahu. The issue of communications is I'm glad you asked that, because that, again, was one that I was alluding to in the beginning. The forced fragmentation of our community by the military occupation has created the largest challenge for us to be able to create an operating political system. Not only between Gaza and the West Bank, and there is something there that we can work on together, and J Street can actually raise as a campaign. The linkage, the safe passageway between Gaza and the West Bank not only will assist in us being able to govern in a unified way, but it allows my company to compete with Hamas in Gaza. Today, if you're an average Gazan and you want to have a living, you're aligned with the only game in town. If there was an open, safe passageway, one example of how we can compete with that, because I do want to compete with that, is allowing the private sector or Palestinian civil society in Jerusalem and the West Bank to be able to operate there as well. That safe passageway was codified in Oslo and never implemented. So as we are asked to recognize all past agreements, let's hold Israel accountable to those same exact words as well. In the agreement, in the article that I wrote, and I'll end with this, I also spoke about the diaspora and where they fit in. I actually am calling for a presidential decree to give a mandate to the Palestinian Central Elections Commission, which is the body that runs elections, to start to register Palestinians globally. Up until now, their mandate has been to register Palestinians under occupation only. And I think it's time that that entity broadens its horizon. That's why I don't think the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is going anywhere. I think the mandate of the PA needs to change, and that's one way to make it change. The other thing I'm calling for is a Palestinian presidential decree for a new, or maybe the first, Palestinian political parties law. I want the youth of our community, and me even, to have the opportunity to engage a political system. If the youth are not allowed to enter a political system, we should not be surprised when they tear the fabric apart. So I want them included, and the way to do that is to allow them to organize within political parties.
Thank you.
I actually,
Fatah split.
yeah. What specific aspect of?
Well, so specifically, is the division that the international community has pushed for the Palestinian Authority not to ally itself with Hamas in order to be able to get international aid, U.S. aid? Does that actually make it less likely or more likely that the PLO, the Palestinians, can reach a deal with Israel?
Yeah, I think before getting to that, let me just say that I agree with what Sam spelled out. I do think that the PLO is the most important Palestinian institution, and not the Palestinian Authority, and that the PLO reforming and reconstituting the PLO needs to be an essential priority of the Palestinian leadership, above and beyond kind of parochial politics. I mean, they've been putting this off. Really for the last quarter century, the idea of reforming and reconstituting the PLO, and it's now created or exacerbated these multiple internal crises. In terms of Hamas and Fatah, I do think that the peace process in general and the international community at large have contributed to the internal division. In fact, I would even argue that internal division and weakness has in many ways become a prerequisite for Palestinian participation in the peace process. You can find evidence of that even going back to the 1970s with Henry Kissinger. But staying kind of in the here and now, I do think that has been the case. However, the United States has kind of shifted its policy, has updated its policy in a way too little too late. Last spring, if you recall, when the latest reconciliation agreement was announced, the United States didn't automatically reject it, but said that they would be willing to deal with the new Palestinian government, of course, under a whole host of conditions. And the Palestinian leadership, in fact, structured that reconciliation in a way so as to meet the restrictions of the international community so that it would not trigger sanctions. There would be no Hamas members, not a unity government where you have members of the two main parties both in the government. There would be no members of any faction, including Hamas, in the government. And even despite that, Israel announced that any government sort of changing moving the bar went from a government that includes Hamas to any government that is blessed by Hamas or accepted by Hamas. These are the words of Netanyahu, would be rejected. And to its credit, and I have to say in a very modest sense, I mean, the United States has often been kind of behind the curve. In this one instance, it wasn't, but in a very sort of minor way. And it was essentially too little too late. There had been too much damage, I think, done already to the Palestinian body politic to overcome the division. If I might just make one one point on the fragmentation question of Palestinians. Fragmentation is not something new to Palestinians. Palestinians have been scattered inside and outside of Palestine for the past 7 decades. And fragmentation is built in really to Palestinian politics. There is a diaspora, there are those inside, there are different kinds of inside. There are inside 1948 and inside 1967. And the center of gravity of Palestinian politics has shifted from the diaspora back to the occupied territories, and who knows, it may shift again, perhaps to Palestinian citizens of Israel, or perhaps back to the diaspora. But we're clearly in a different phase of Palestinian leadership. One of the great ironies of Palestinian political development is when all Palestinians were in Palestine during the mandate before 1948, they had a very hard time putting together a national leadership. And it was only after the exile and fragmentation and destruction of the Nakba that they were actually able to put together a quote-unquote national leadership. It took a generation after the Nakba, but they did do it. So it's not impossible. There were moments when, I mean, you had the Gaza Strip. It's not just Gaza and the West Bank were separate, but Gaza was under Egyptian administration, and the West Bank was being administered and run by Jordan, and there was almost no contact at all between the two, and yet they were still able to forge a national movement. I think, notwithstanding disruptions in communication and electricity, it is not so much about the technology as much as it is about the political will. And I think that's what needs to be reformulated.
And that dovetails into the question that that Huda is going to answer. She's going to tell us a little bit more about this 3-state solution. Is this separation between the West Bank and Gaza Strip inevitable, or is there any way to fix this?
Yes, there is a way, and it's what Sam talked about in the agreements. Physically, Gaza and the West Bank should be connected, and the continuation of the isolation of Gaza is working against the Israelis as well as the Palestinian national interest. So when you think of Gaza, I don't think anybody can actually describe the ghetto Gaza is. Nobody. There is no experience on the ground now in the world that matches that horrific experience. And I don't want to see another war in 2 years of Netanyahu's administration. We are, as Palestinians, very concerned about the fact that the 6-year-old Gazan boy or girl have experienced 3 different assaults on Gaza. They are paying the price of electing Hamas. Imagine if we are going to do the same, and we will make people pay the price of electing Bibi. One of the things that I also think is working for our interest now is that, you know, even if it's the worst case scenario to have Bibi in Israel as the prime minister, it is actually working for us. He is a great PR for the Palestinians because we are not doing a good job being PR people. He is exposing the ugliness of the occupation, exposing the ugliness of the stubbornness of the Israeli administration for many years, actually making our claim that we have no partner in Israel is viable. So he is good in that term, in that sense now. The continuation of the exclusion of Gaza and helping, you know, the pushing of the Gaza leadership to find other ways in order to claim its own territory is going to go against the Palestinians and the Israelis and maybe the international world. So, you know, when you cut power off on Gaza, what would be the outcome of that? Millions of children. So, and it could be a joke, but it's serious. You have people being born to that ghetto. What is the expectation of them in 20 years? Just think of the result of raising them in that ghetto. And the last one, I actually want to honor the question about how can the Palestinians use the time now, since the American-Israeli relationships are not in its best shape. I don't think that the American political system can hold a different thinking in terms of the Palestinian rights. 22 months, I think, in front of Obama to do something. I don't think they are enough. The forces working against him are huge. I don't think the American people have done enough to support Obama's vision in terms of the Middle East. I don't think there is hope in that sense, but I do believe that the Palestinians have to move quickly in order to use these 22 months for advancing the Palestinian cause.
Thank you so much. We'll take some more questions from the audience.
Given the despair and the hopelessness after the collapse of the peace process this time, and the re-election of Bibi in an even more aggressive mode, what's the likelihood that ISIS will be able to, or something like ISIS will be able to make inroads in the West Bank or in Gaza, or that there are more rockets? Everybody here yesterday seemed to assume that another launch of rockets in Gaza was only a matter of time. So that's my question.
Okay.
Hi there. My name is Emma. I go to University of Chicago. So this question has been asked, I think, in other panels, but I want to bring it up again and see if I can get a more concrete answer. Many of us are Jewish students in the diaspora. How can we partner with Palestinian students in the diaspora to work together to empower bold U.S. leadership towards a two-state solution, encourage our communities to take 100% responsibility for their role in ending the occupation? What are some concrete steps that we can take to work together and bridge that divide? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zach, and I had a slightly different question. We mentioned earlier Marwan Barghouti, who we all hear about as the next leader, in theory anyway. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Palestine in the West Bank, and I guess my question off of the discussion that she and I had is, Marwan is in prison, which kind of makes him a little bit more popular. Outside of prison, what's the chance that he actually maintains that popularity and is able to form a government that is strong enough to lead the Palestinian people in a constructive dialogue?
We'll take one more question from the audience.
I'm not sure my question fits with anybody else's, but I'll ask it anyway. So my question is for all four of you, if that's okay. I don't have any questions about policy and what do you think is going to happen, this or that. I'm policed out. So what is your experience going into the West Bank, going out, whether you come in through Jordan, whether you go into and out of Gaza? What is it like for you when you're dealing with these Israeli 18, 20-year-old soldiers, maybe the cousins or the friends of all these students here?
Thank you very much. All right, and I'm actually going to insert a question here on Marwan Barghouti. So the question is Marwan going to be as popular out of prison as he is in prison? I also got a question saying, should peace activists conduct an international campaign for the release of Marwan Barghouti or not? We have a question about ISIS, whether that will have any foothold in the West Bank Gaza Strip, and students partnering together for a two-state solution. I'd actually like to expand that question to include kind of strategies that the Palestinian Authority or the PLO has or has not had about how it can galvanize a lot of the, positive international support for Palestine into more concrete steps. And I think a lot of people say that that's not happening, whether it's on the BDS movement or other things that the international community can do. We'll start with you, Sam, if that's okay.
Sure. Very good questions. Very briefly, I believe that we have within our society the ingredients for a much more militant and extreme elements to appear. The ground is fertile. More occupation, more loss of hope, more despair, less jobs. We will be closer to having something where we will wish we had Hamas. And that has already been seen in Gaza and even in the West Bank, near my home. I mean, there are examples where we can see this. In Gaza, it's very clear because although the Israelis would like to think that they withdrew from Gaza and sadly all they got is rockets in return, they forget a link in the discussion, which is the hermetic seal of Gaza when they left. When Gaza actually started to be governed by Hamas, it was the most quiet time on the border. Ask the Israeli generals who have published this publicly. The elements within Gaza which are more extreme than Hamas are trying to disrupt Hamas's governance by lobbing rockets or otherwise. So the issue of can we become more extreme? Absolutely. Put the United States under occupation for 48 years, and I wonder if they'll still be calling for international law to be applied. I doubt it. I think they'll be reading the Second Amendment of the Constitution. The excellent question, as throughout the conference, the excellent questions are from the students. The excellent question of what can be done in terms of campaigning. And I actually would like to propose 3 things, and I'd like to put a footnote that these can be done by J Street U and other allies of your organization with or without Palestinians. It's better with, but if there's a complication on your campus where for some reason, any reason, Palestinians do not want to operate within a domain where you are operating, that does not relieve you from your 100% responsibility if you're serious about your 100% responsibility. And those 3 things are the following. 1, call for the stop of illegal imprisonments, especially administrative detention, where any of us can be arrested for 6 months with no charges, no claims, no anything. This policy of Israel being able to disrupt the emergence of leadership, and I'm not talking about people who are a security threat to Israel. I'm talking about thought control, where people who are clearly emerging leaders are being arrested. And if any of us think that Israel is not negotiating with Hamas, wake up. Yeah. Every time Israel wants to negotiate with Hamas, they arrest a Hamas operative. Most of them are political operatives. And they interrogate them. And unlike the stereotype where every interrogation is a beating, that's not true. The majority of interrogations are across a table negotiating with somebody who wants to get your thought. So there is a process where the prisons are creating an entire school to generate more and more extremism and more resistance against the occupation. Let's reduce the number of prisoners and open up a Palestinian political system, and I think we'll see a change in that. That's something we can call for, the stopping of illegal imprisonments. The second, which I already mentioned that I won't repeat at length, is the opening of the safe passageway between the Gaza and the West Bank. We can do it because it's needed for economic purposes. We can do it because it was part of the Oslo Agreement, which was never abided to. That can create a different reality on the ground, and that's something we can call for because the U.S. has, I believe, the leverage to get Israel to do the right thing there. And the third is not to veto the legitimate Palestinian leadership, no matter how weak, because of any alliances they may have internally. And we already spoke about this as well. If the Israeli government is going to question the legitimacy of the leadership because of a relationship with Hamas or others, allow us to do the same by linking the settler movement to the Israeli leadership as well.
Great, thanks.
Oh, one last point regarding Marwan. I've been there too long to individualize this process. I'm much more interested in what's the next institutional process that will produce a leader than who the leader is.
Thank you. Khalid, if you could discuss a little bit more about Marwan Barghouti, and especially, is the Palestinian Authority interested in having Marwan Barghouti out or not?
That's a good question. I think the question of Marwan Barghouti, which often comes up, really has to do with the big question mark that exists around the matter of succession, which I think causes a great deal of anxiety for Palestinians and for others who look at the situation. They see Mahmoud Abbas is in his 80s. I think he's at least 80. He's, I'm hearing, in relatively good health, but he's obviously not immortal. And right now, there aren't mechanisms in place. There is no heir apparent. There is no obvious successor. And in fact, were there to be a change in leadership tomorrow, we would be confronted with a very difficult situation, because we'd have two different mechanisms in place. One for replacing the Palestinian Authority president, in which case the Palestinian Basic Law would take effect, and the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Palestinian Legislative Council, who is a Hamas member of the last elected PLC in any case. So you have a situation where a Hamas person would be serving as at least an interim president until an election is held for permanent president, not permanent president, but for a regular president, and then a different mechanism inside the PLO where the executive committee would have to convene and appoint a new chairman. And that would most likely be a Fatah person, in which case we could have a Hamas person in charge of the PA and a Fatah person in charge of the PLO. Now, it's true the international community deals with primarily the PLO, but funds go to the PA. And so that would create a very, very significant crisis. And the fact that there is no attempt really to resolve this contradiction, to deal with this, to preempt this crisis, I think is telling. It's very similar to unaccountable leaderships elsewhere in the region and in the world, where there is a real those who are in power very jealously guard their power. They're loath to designate successors for fear of being replaced before they feel it's time. There is a degree of paranoia, I think, that is setting into this leadership with regard to any and all potential rivals, and Marwan is one of many who is, I think, he's seen as someone who is popular and is on some level resented by the current leadership for that fact. One interesting phenomenon, and I'll just throw this out there as a point of observation. If you look at polls of Palestinians over time, when Palestinians are asked about, and this question regularly comes up in polls, who would you prefer, Mahmoud Abbas or Ismail Haniyeh from Hamas, or when they do these sort of mock polling of who would you vote for, Abbas or Mishal, Abbas versus Haniyeh, consistently Mahmoud Abbas beats out any challenger from Hamas. But when you add a third person to the question, who would you vote for among the following? Mahmoud Abbas, Marwan Barghouti, Mustafa Barghouti. Whenever there are more than two choices in the mix, what's very interesting is the trend is that Mahmoud Abbas comes in third. So very often after Hamas or someone like Marwan Barghouti, because what that tells me is that Palestinians understand that for the moment it is safer, it is more practical to have Mahmoud Abbas as leader, or the current leadership, or they don't trust Hamas on a certain level, but on a deeper level, they yearn for the ability to have choices, which they currently do not have.
Thank you. And Huda, can you tell us a little bit more about how you get in and out of the logistics of getting in and out of Palestinian areas, and also perhaps more about Marwan Barghouti and how he's viewed among people in the West Bank?
I'll start with Marwan. I think the fact that the Palestinian Authority is not doing something to release him, and the fact that they are happy that he's in prison, is making him popular among the youth in the West Bank. And I think the fact that we actually have no way of electing a new leadership. This is something that we need to work on internally. For us, this is a crisis, but we don't have the chance to do that so far. We've been running from one disaster to another, and we're hoping that the society will hold itself before everything collapses. But the story of a Palestinian woman working in this field, going back and forth, traveling. I work with 87 organizations on the ground, Israeli, international, and Palestinian organizations that do all kinds of people-to-people work. And in order to do that, I have to get a permit from the Israeli authorities, which at one point I refused to do because I am not going to meet friends and get a permit to meet friends. But for the sake of work, I compromised. And to come to J Street conference, first of all, I have to get a visa. And thanks for J Street, they wrote a compelling letter, so I got a visa. And then I cannot travel through Ben Gurion, so I have to go to Jordan, and I cannot stop in Europe because I have a Palestinian Authority document on me. So my journey started last Monday, leaving Hebron to Amman, and then Amman to Dubai, and then Dubai to DC. And it's going to be the same way. It is not easy to cross checkpoints on daily basis. It is not easy to drive on Road 60 for a regular Palestinian, let alone for a woman who sometimes have to go back home to Hebron late at night. So one of the funny stories I had is an Israeli policeman stopped me at 10 a.m. near Gush Atzion in Beit Lahem, and the first question he had for me, where is your husband? So for him it was weird for a woman from Hebron to be on the road at 10 p.m. And I said, we are normal people. We actually have women who can travel at night without being persecuted. So this is also the notion, you're talking to people who think you have a tail. So there is this way of seeing us, but the most dangerous interaction on daily basis is with the 18-year-old soldier on a checkpoint. This person is educated to know that I'm a threat. So when I cross a checkpoint, most of the Palestinians do not pay attention to the injustices happening on the checkpoint. I am trying to be more proactive. One of the stories I have, and I hope I'm not going to be long with that, you have a blind man who's 54 years old on a checkpoint. Everybody passing by him, he has been stopped by the soldiers, by the Israeli soldiers, not to cross. Every one of us in this line, hoping that we will get along with our business and not paying attention to that man. I left the line, went to the blind man, and I talked with him. He told me that they asked him to stop. He doesn't know why. They are not giving him an access to go to Jerusalem. He has a doctor's appointment. I asked to, of course, I use English all the time, and this puts me in a different level. That's one of my nonviolent tactics on checkpoints. I get angry most of the time, but I try to keep calm. This is what I did. I asked to talk to the head of that checkpoint on why this man is standing there. This is not good for you. This is not good for us. And the reason is the Israeli law gives him give men of 55 years old a permit to go inside Israel without having the proper documents. This man was 3 months short of 55 years old. And they left him there for hours until I intervened. So this is the life that a Palestinian peace builder is living. And can you imagine if we have a leader who's actually with a vision, how he is going to be a threat and how he's going to be treated?
Since you guys have been waiting so patiently, I'm going to get your questions really quickly, and then we have 6 minutes from the panel to answer them. Go ahead, sir.
There's been a suggestion of expanding the political process among the Palestinians to include people who live in the diaspora throughout the world. And my question is, how would that affect the participation of those people concerning the right of return?
Mm-hmm.
I'm Anthony from Reed College, and I'm wondering, given the reconciliation agreement between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and how obviously that has not brought harmony to the conflict between them, total harmony to the conflict between them. What are the hopes, or the prospects, I should say, for reconciliation between those two groups? And if reconciliation were affected, how would it affect negotiations?
Hi, I'm Allison from the University of Florida. I just have a question going back a little more historically. There always has been a lot of factionalism. I know you addressed that a little bit earlier. Fatah was originally an opposition group that I think had a lot of really strong support from Syria. So considering that, I guess since the 80s, lately we've had a lot more diplomatic support for a Palestinian state and recognition of the PLO, but there has been a lack of revolutionary Arab nationalist leaders that traditionally did provide a lot of the training, like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. Has that weakened Palestinian institutions, or has it allowed them to kind of flourish on their own? Has the lack of support helped, like, hurt or help the Palestinian movement? Thanks.
Hi, I work for an international organization that implements USAID programs in the West Bank and Gaza, and as you know, we're facing a possibly imminent suspension of U.S. government assistance, which is both to PA institutions, civil society organizations, and the private sector. And I wonder if you could comment on the perhaps value and drawbacks to USG assistance, and then also what you would want J Street to bring to their members of Congress on this issue.
I just walked in the room about 2 minutes ago, and I missed everything. And so I only came to here, and unfortunately I didn't get the schedule correct. I have a question, and it has to do, I'm 69 years old, waited 67 years for peace, and I don't see it coming. I think the main problem, big problem, the question is, this is directed to anybody in the room, in fact. The basic thing is that I don't see any trust between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
All right, I think you guys, we have to end at 10:15. I'm so sorry. So what I'm going to do really quickly is give each of the panelists exactly 60 seconds to answer with any closing remarks, but please be very brief because we need to end, and Elaine has some comments that she wants to make.
60 seconds, I will speak very fast. I'm actually going to mention something that happened, that was mentioned earlier. I'm a U.S. citizen born in Youngstown, Ohio. I have the exact same restrictions that Huda has. I can't get to Jerusalem. I need permits to move and go and come. Can't use the airport because I'm a Palestinian. You all have more rights there than I do as an American. Diaspora participation and the right of return, almost unconnected. The PLO, I believe, requires or needs all Palestinians to be part of that representative body, refugees included. Actually, I want to see refugees heavily included so I can start hearing from the refugees directly, and I think that would help even with the right of return issue itself.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Okay.
I'll tackle the reconciliation question. Prospects for reconciliation. I think, I mean, one of the things that we saw during the early part of the Arab Spring is Palestinians taking to the streets and demanding not an end to the fall of the regime, but what they were demanding was an end to the division. And so it was clear, I think it was clear to the Palestinian leadership that ending the division was a top priority. And that's really what spurred, I think, a lot of activity in that direction by Hamas and Fatah. They felt the pressure from below. But they haven't really done more than sign pieces of paper. Sam has already laid out some of the practical challenges to overcoming this division, but what it really comes down to is a matter of political will. And I think what might help give the Palestinians that political will is some encouragement from the international community. Although this is a division that is self-inflicted and in many ways self-imposed, it's something that the international community needs to see as bad for everyone. It's not just bad for Palestinians, it's also bad for Israel. We see these episodic recurrence of violence in Gaza. It is a it is a function of this division, and it's bad for the international community. It's something that I think they need to push as well as regional actors.
Thank you so much, Khalid and Huda.
So my call is for you guys. If we are in the West Bank and Palestine, in Gaza, and in those God-forsaken places, do not give hope. You also you shouldn't give hope. Engage, talk to others, go to your senators, go to your representatives, tell them that this is a must for the whole world's stability, is to address the injustices that is happening in Palestine. If they are interested in a viable Palestinian state, they also you guys should advocate for that. If you are in this room, then you should be on that page. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'll turn it to Elaine. No, go ahead.
It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to realize that this session could have been 4 times longer, but it's not. We do have the privilege, however, of being one of the 2 sessions being recorded today. So if you want, or if you came in late, if you want to hear again and pay attention and take notes, there will be a video up on the J Street website that you will be able not only to review, but to send other people to hear the richness of what we've heard. Could we have shukran? Thank you to all of our panelists. On the subject of carrying the word to Congress, the next item on our agenda is the training for the lobby day tomorrow. If you look in your program, you will see the room where each of the regional groups are meeting. I urge you to go and be participating in that event. If you're not going, you have a short break. Then there are sessions at noon of your choice, and then a large plenary at 1:30. Thank you all. Okay, can I have my list?
Thank you, of course.
I'm sorry about pushing
No,
that.
that's totally fine. My understanding was that, so I had 2 parts. The 10:15, I was supposed to give it to you, and you were supposed to end at 10:20. But maybe I misunderstood, but that's what the paper said.
Yeah, well, if you don't feel cheated.
Not at all.